The morning sun glints off the waters of the River Derwent as it flows beneath the wooden bridge at Stamford Bridge, a crossing point so unremarkable that 1,000 travellers have passed over it without a second thought. But on this crisp autumn morning, September 25th, 1066, this simple timber structure is about to become the stage for one of the most dramatic individual acts of courage in medieval warfare. A single Viking warrior stands alone on the bridge. He is massive, perhaps 6.5 feet tall, clad in a full coat of mail that extends to his knees, a conical helmet on his head, and in his hands, a Danish battle axe so large it requires both arms to wield. Behind him, across the eastern bank of the river, thousands of his fellow Norsemen scramble desperately to don their armor, to form their shield walls, to prepare for a battle they never saw coming. Before him, pressing forward in a wave of iron and fury, comes the English army, 7,000 men who have just completed one of the most remarkable forced marches in military history, covering nearly 200 miles in just 4 days to catch their enemies by complete surprise. The Viking giant plants his feet. The bridge is perhaps 15 feet wide, just enough for 3 men to stand abreast, but barely. He will hold it alone. He must hold it. Every minute he buys is another minute for his kinsmen to arm themselves, to form up, to prepare to sell their lives dearly. The first English soldiers reach the bridge approach. They see the lone warrior and hesitate. Then they charge. What happens in the next 20 minutes will pass into legend, a feat so extraordinary that it will be recorded in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, retold in Norse sagas, and debated by historians for nearly a millennium. But it is only one moment in a day that will see 15,000 men clash in brutal hand-to-hand combat, a day that will mark the end of an age, a day that will determine whether England remains Anglo-Saxon or falls to Norse conquest. This is the story of the Battle of Stamford Bridge, the forgotten battle that changed everything, the last great victory of the Anglo-Saxon age, and the beginning of the end for the last great Viking warlord who ever lived. And it all hinges on what happens in the next few hours. To understand why English and Viking armies meet in blood on this autumn day, we must travel backward 9 months to a cold January morning in Westminster, where an old man lies dying and 3 kingdoms hold their breath. Edward the Confessor, King of England for 23 years, is on his deathbed on January 5th, 1066. He is perhaps 60 years old, which makes him ancient by medieval standards. He has been a pious king, a builder of churches. Westminster Abbey stands as testament to his devotion, but he has been a weak king, manipulated by powerful earls, unable to impose his will, and critically, childless. England's throne sits empty, and there is no clear heir. As Edward breathes his last, 3 men across Europe believe they have legitimate claims to rule England. William, Duke of Normandy, distant cousin to Edward, claims the dead king promised him the succession years ago. He is ruthless, ambitious, illegitimate. They call him William the Bastard behind his back, and absolutely determined that England will be his. Harald Hardrada, King of Norway, bases his claim on an agreement made decades earlier between his predecessor and an earlier English king. He is perhaps the greatest Viking warrior alive, a man whose very name means hard ruler. A giant who has fought battles from Norway to the Byzantine Empire, who commands fleets of longships and armies of Norse berserkers. And then there is Harold Godwinson. Harold is 44 years old in January 1066, the Earl of Wessex, the most powerful nobleman in England, brother-in-law to the dying Edward, and the man who, in Edward's final hours, receives what appears to be the king's deathbed designation as successor. Harold is not royal by birth. His father, Godwin, was a powerful earl, but the family are not of royal blood. Yet Harold has spent his entire adult life preparing for this moment. He is a proven military commander, having crushed a Welsh rebellion so thoroughly that the Welsh princes sent him the head of their own king to sue for peace. He is an administrator who understands the complex system of English law and governance. He is popular with the common people and respected by the warrior class. Most importantly, he is here. William is across the Channel. Harold is across the North Sea. Harold is in Westminster, in the room when Edward dies. On January 6, 1066, the day after Edward's death, Harold Godwinson is crowned King of England in Westminster Abbey. The speed is breathtaking and deliberate. In medieval politics, possession is 9/10 of the law. By crowning himself immediately, Harold presents his rivals with a fait accompli. England has a king. If you want the throne, you'll have to take it by force. Both William and Harold begin preparing to do exactly that. But there is a fourth player in this deadly game, one whose role is perhaps the most tragic of all. Tostig Godwinson, Harold's own brother. Tostig was once Earl of Northumbria, but in 1065 his harsh rule provoked a rebellion. Harold, caught between family loyalty and political necessity, sided with the rebels. Tostig was exiled, humiliated, stripped of his power by his own brother. Now Tostig burns with resentment and plots his revenge. If Harold wants to be king, Tostig will make him pay for the throne in blood. And to do that, Tostig will ally with the most dangerous Viking warlord alive. Harold Sigurdsson, known to history as Harald Hardrada, is 51 years old in 1066 and already a living legend. His life reads like the plot of an epic saga, because it is an epic saga, literally recorded in the Icelandic sagas that preserve Norse history. At age 15, he fought at the Battle of Stiklestad, where his half-brother, King Olaf II of Norway, was killed. Wounded and in exile, young Harold fled east, eventually joining the Varangian Guard, the elite Viking warriors who served the Byzantine emperor in Constantinople. For 15 years, Harold fought across the Mediterranean and Middle East. He campaigned in Sicily, Bulgaria, and the Holy Land. He amassed a fortune in plunder. He fought in palace intrigues, was imprisoned, escaped, and eventually returned to Norway with enough gold to claim the throne. He has been King of Norway since 1046. 20 years of consolidating power, crushing rivals, and dreaming of greater conquests. He is massive, standing well over 6 feet tall in an age when the average man is 5'6". He is scarred from dozens of battles. He is calculating, ambitious, and utterly without mercy. His nickname, Hardrada, means hard ruler or stern counsel. It's not a term of endearment. When Tostig Godwinson arrives in Norway in the spring of 1066 with tales of England ripe for conquest and offers to support a Norwegian invasion, Hardrada listens. England is rich. England is divided. England's new king is not of royal blood and can be challenged. And most temptingly, if Harold can conquer England, he will rule an empire stretching from Norway to the English Channel. The opportunity is irresistible. In the summer of 1066, Harald Hardrada assembles an invasion fleet. The sources vary, but most suggest around 300 longships, one of the largest Viking fleets ever assembled. Each ship carries perhaps 50 warriors, meaning Harold's army numbers around 15,000 men. These are not the Viking raiders of old, appearing in a few ships to burn a monastery and flee. This is a full-scale invasion force, an army of conquest, carrying not just warriors, but supplies, equipment, horses for the commanders, and the infrastructure of war. In early September 1066, this vast fleet sails south from Norway, picks up Tostig and his forces in Scotland, and enters the Humber River on England's northeastern coast. On September 20th, 1066, Harald Hardrada's army lands in England. The Viking Age, which began in 793 with the raid on Lindisfarne Monastery, is about to end where it started, in the north of England, in blood and fire. The first English city to face the Norse invasion is York, the greatest city in the north, with perhaps 8,000 inhabitants, enormous by medieval standards. York is defended by 2 northern earls, Edwin, Earl of Mercia, and Morcar, Earl of Northumbria, who replaced Tostig after his rebellion. They are young, perhaps in their 20s, inexperienced in major warfare, and commanding a force of perhaps 3,000 to 4,000 men, less than half the size of Hardrada's army. But they are brave, and York is worth defending. If York falls, all of northern England lies open to Norse conquest. On September 20th, 1066, the two armies meet at Fulford, just south of York. The Battle of Fulford is a disaster for the English. The sources are fragmentary, but the outcome is clear. Hardrada's veterans, hardened by decades of warfare, smash through the English lines. Edwin and Morcar fight desperately but are overwhelmed by superior numbers and experience. The casualties are horrific. Contemporary sources suggest the slaughter was so great that men could cross the river on corpses without getting their feet wet. Whether literally true or poetic exaggeration, the image conveys the scale of the catastrophe. Edwin and Morcar survive, fleeing with the remnants of their forces. But York is defenseless. The city surrenders to avoid destruction, agreeing to provide hostages and supplies to the Norse army. Harald Hardrada and Tostig have won their first victory. Northern England lies at their feet. Now they wait for Harold Godwinson to bring his army north so they can crush him and claim the throne. But they have made a critical error. They have underestimated Harold. When news of the Norse invasion reaches Harold in London on approximately September 19th, he faces a nightmarish strategic situation. His kingdom is being invaded from the north by the greatest Viking warlord alive. But he knows, every intelligence report confirms, that William of Normandy is also preparing to invade from the south. Harold has spent the entire summer with his army on England's southern coast, watching for Norman ships. Now, with his forces exhausted from months of campaigning and his supplies running low, Harald Hardrada has invaded the north. Harold must make an agonizing choice. March north to face Hardrada, leaving the south exposed to William, or stay south and let the north fall, potentially facing two enemies when William eventually lands. Harold chooses offense. On approximately September 20th, the same day as the Battle of Fulford, Harold begins assembling his forces for a forced march north. What happens next is one of the most remarkable logistical achievements of medieval warfare. Harold leads his army, approximately 7,000 men, on a march of nearly 200 miles from London to Yorkshire in just 4 days. To understand what this means, medieval armies typically marched 15 to 20 miles per day under good conditions. Harold is averaging 50 miles per day, with men in armor, carrying weapons and supplies, moving through September rains. This is brutally punishing. Dr. Stephen Murillo, medieval military historian at Wabash College, notes, Harold's forced march north in 1066 ranks among the great military movements in history. The physical endurance required, the organizational skill to keep the army supplied and together, and the leadership to maintain morale and discipline under such conditions. It's genuinely extraordinary. The soldiers march through day and night. They snatch a few hours of sleep and march again. Their feet blister, their muscles scream, but they march. Because their king marches, because England depends on them, because Viking invaders have burned English soil, and it will not stand. As they march, Harold sends riders ahead, calling the Fyrd, the local militia, to arms. These are farmers and townsmen who owe military service to their lord. They are not professional soldiers, but they are Englishmen defending their homes, and they will fight. On September 24th, Harold's army arrives at Tadcaster, just 9 miles from York. Harald Hardrada and Tostig have no idea he's coming. To understand the battle that follows, we must understand Harald Hardrada's fatal mistake. After accepting York's surrender, Harold withdraws his army to Stamford Bridge, a small settlement about 7 miles east of York. The sources disagree on exactly why. Perhaps he's waiting for the hostages York promised. Perhaps he's giving his men time to rest and enjoy their plunder. Perhaps he's positioning to receive reinforcements. What's certain is that Harold believes he has time. He knows Harold Godwinson was on the south coast. Even if Harold has heard of the invasion, it would take weeks for him to march north. The Norse army is relaxed, confident, enjoying the warm September weather. Many of Harold's men have left their armor on the ships, which are anchored several miles away at Rickall. In the warm autumn sunshine, heavy mail coats are uncomfortable. Why wear them when there's no enemy within 100 miles? This is the moment when Harold strikes. September 25th, 1066. Dawn. Harold's army, concealed by the rolling Yorkshire countryside, approaches Stamford Bridge from the west. The English scouts report what they see. Thousands of Norse warriors scattered across the fields east of the River Derwent, many without armor, completely unprepared for battle. Harold has achieved complete tactical surprise, perhaps the greatest surprise attack in English military history. But there is a problem. The bridge. The River Derwent flows between Harold's army and the unprepared Norse forces. There are fords, yes, but crossing a river under fire is deadly. The bridge offers the fastest route, but it's narrow, only about 15 feet wide, and someone has to take it. This is when the Viking giant makes his stand. The sources don't record his name. The Anglo-Saxon chronicle calls him simply a Norwegian. The Norse sagas elaborate with details that may or may not be accurate. But all sources agree on the essential facts. A single, massive Viking warrior, in full armor, armed with a two-handed battle axe, positions himself on the bridge and dares the English army to come take it. And for the next 20 minutes, he holds the entire English advance alone. The scene at the bridge is chaos incarnate. On the western bank, English soldiers press forward, urged on by their commanders, blocked by a single man who seems unkillable. The bridge is too narrow for them to outflank him, too sturdy to quickly destroy, and the Viking giant too skilled to overwhelm by frontal assault. The Anglo-Saxon chronicle records, one of the Norwegians withstood the whole English army so that they could not cross the bridge nor secure victory. An Englishman shot at him with an arrow, but it did not harm him. Then another came under the bridge and stabbed him from below through the wooden planks. Other sources give different details, but the story that has passed into legend is this. English soldiers charge the bridge in waves. The Viking giant swings his massive axe in devastating arcs. Men fall screaming, their shields split, their skulls crushed, their bodies tumbling into the river below. The bridge's timbers are slick with blood. Accounts vary on how many he kills. Some say 40 Englishmen, others fewer, but the number matters less than the effect. For 20 minutes, one man holds back an army. Then an English soldier, desperate, resourceful, or simply lucky, finds a solution. He climbs into a small boat or floating barrel, sources differ, floats beneath the bridge and thrusts his spear up through the gaps in the wooden planks, piercing the Viking warrior from below. The giant falls, the bridge is taken, and now 7,000 English soldiers pour across the River Derwent like a flood of iron and rage. On the eastern bank, the Norse army scrambles into formation. Harald Hardrada, somewhere between shock, fury, and grudging respect for Harold Godwinson's audacity, begins organizing his men into a shield wall formation. But many are still without armor. Many are scattered across the fields. The surprise is complete and devastating. If you appreciate stories like this, tales of impossible courage, of empires won and lost in a single day, of moments when the fate of nations hung on the decisions of individual warriors, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We work to bring these forgotten chapters of history to life, to honor the men and women whose choices echo through the centuries. Your support helps us continue telling these stories. Now, let us return to that field in Yorkshire, where two armies are about to clash in one of the bloodiest battles of the medieval age. The Battle of Stamford Bridge is about to enter its main phase, and to understand what happens next, you need to understand medieval warfare, specifically the shield wall. The shield wall is the fundamental tactic of both Anglo-Saxon and Viking warfare. Warriors stand shoulder to shoulder, overlapping their round wooden shields to create a wall of protection. The front rank thrusts with spears and swords while the rear ranks push forward, maintaining pressure. A well-formed shield wall is nearly impenetrable to frontal assault. Breaking it requires either finding a weak point, outflanking it, or simply grinding it down through superior numbers and endurance. Harald Hardrada forms his shield wall in a defensive position, likely on rising ground east of the bridge. His banner, Land Ravager, a raven emblem that, according to legend, promised victory to those it flew over, waves above the Norse lines. The sources give us one final detail before the battle is joined. Harold Godwinson approaches under a flag of truce and offers terms. Riding forward with a small group of companions, Harold calls to the Norse lines, "Is Tostig Godwinson here?" Tostig, standing with Harald Hardrada, steps forward. The two brothers face each other across the blood-soaked ground. Harold, King of England. Tostig, the exiled traitor who has brought foreign invaders to English soil. Harold offers his brother peace. "Tostig, I offer you a third of my kingdom if you will make peace with me. Return to my side, and all will be forgiven." It is a stunning offer, a genuine attempt at reconciliation, or perhaps a brilliant piece of psychological warfare designed to sow division in the Norse ranks. Tostig asks, "And what will you give to Harold of Norway?" Harold's reply is recorded in multiple sources. "To Harald Hardrada, I will give 7 feet of English earth, or as much more as he is taller than other men." It is a death sentence delivered as an epitaph. Harald Hardrada is famously tall. The grave Harold offers him will need to be longer than normal. It's a declaration that this ends only one way, with Hardrada dead and buried in English soil. Tostig rejects the offer. The brothers will not reconcile. One of them will die today. The negotiations are over. The shield walls advance. What follows is hours of brutal, grinding, exhausting combat, the kind of warfare that destroys men's bodies and souls. Shield wall fighting is not the romanticized sword dueling of Hollywood films. It is shoving and stabbing, an experience closer to a rugby scrum than a fencing match. Men in the front ranks press their shields forward, trying to create gaps in the enemy line. When a gap appears, spears and swords thrust through. Men in the rear ranks push those in front, maintain pressure, and step forward to fill gaps when front rank fighters fall. The noise is overwhelming, the crash of shield on shield, the screams of wounded men, the shouted commands of officers trying to maintain formation, the constant ringing of metal on metal. The smell is worse. Sweat, blood, excrement. Men void their bowels in terror or when they die. The iron tang of blood so thick you can taste it, and the horror is indescribable. Men watch their friends' faces split by axe blows. They slip on ground made muddy with blood. They fight until their arms can barely lift their weapons, and then they fight longer because the alternative is death. The English have the advantage of numbers and surprise, but the Norse have the advantage of desperation. They cannot retreat, cannot flee, cannot do anything but fight. Harald Hardrada moves through the battle like the legendary warrior he is. At 51, an age when most medieval men are old, he fights with the fury of his youth. His sword rises and falls. Men die before him. He rallies his troops, reforms broken sections of the line, leads by example. But the English weight of numbers is telling. Slowly, grimly, the Norse shield wall begins to buckle. And then Harald Hardrada falls. An English arrow strikes him in the throat. The greatest Viking warlord of his age, the man who fought from Norway to Jerusalem, who commanded the Varangian Guard, who dreamed of ruling an empire from the North Sea to the Channel. He dies in a muddy Yorkshire field, choking on his own blood. When their king falls, the Norse centre begins to collapse. But the battle is far from over. Tostig takes command of the surviving Norse forces and rallies them. He has nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. His brother has offered him mercy once and been refused. There will be no second offer. Tostig will die here. The only question is how many Englishmen he takes with him. The fighting reaches a new intensity. The Norse warriors, knowing they are doomed, fight with the fury of desperation. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records, "There was great slaughter on both sides." Modern estimates, necessarily speculative given the fragmentary sources, suggest English casualties of 2,000 to 3,000 killed or wounded, nearly half of Harold's army. Norse casualties are likely similar or higher, perhaps 4,000 to 5,000 dead. These are catastrophic losses, proportionally equivalent to the bloodiest battles of the American Civil War or World War I. For context, the entire population of England in 1066 is perhaps 1.52 million people. This single battle kills perhaps 0.3% of the entire population in a single afternoon. Then, late in the afternoon, a new crisis. Norse reinforcements arrive. Eystein Ore, Hardrada's commander who was left to guard the ships at Rickle, has heard the sounds of battle and force marched his men to the battlefield. They arrive wearing their full armor, mail coats that weigh 30 to 40 pounds, worn during a 7-mile run in September heat. The Norse call this final force Ore's Storm. They crash into the English lines with desperate fury, and for a brief moment it seems the battle might turn. But the men of Ore's Storm are already exhausted from their forced march. They fight in heavy armor in afternoon heat, and the English, despite their own exhaustion, have momentum. Ore's Storm is the last gasp of the Norse army. After fierce fighting, Eystein Ore falls. Tostig Godwinson falls. The Norse shield wall, which has held for hours, finally and completely breaks. What follows is not battle, but massacre. The surviving Norse warriors flee eastward toward their ships. The English pursue, cutting down the exhausted, fleeing men. Some Norse warriors reach the ships at Rickle. Most do not. Of the approximately 300 longships that brought Harald Hardrada's army to England, only 24 are needed to carry the survivors home. As the sun sets on September 25, 1066, Harold Godwinson stands on the battlefield at Stamford Bridge, victorious. He has achieved what seemed impossible. In just 5 days, he has marched his army 200 miles, achieved complete tactical surprise, and destroyed the greatest Viking invasion force ever assembled. Harald Hardrada, the last great Viking, lies dead on English soil. Tostig, the treacherous brother, is dead. The Viking Age, which terrorized Europe for 3 centuries, has effectively ended. But the cost is devastating. Harold's army has suffered appalling casualties. Perhaps 1/3 of his men are dead or too wounded to fight. The survivors are exhausted beyond comprehension. They've marched 200 miles, then fought for hours in brutal hand-to-hand combat. They need rest. They need time to recover. They need to bury their dead and care for their wounded. Harold doesn't have time. Even as the battle rages at Stamford Bridge, William of Normandy is boarding his invasion fleet on the French coast. The favorable winds that have kept him bottled up in port for weeks are finally changing. On September 28, 1066, just 3 days after Stamford Bridge, William of Normandy lands at Pevensey on the southern coast of England. Harold receives the news in York, where he has paused to rest his battered army. Now he faces another impossible situation. His kingdom is being invaded from the south. His army is in the north, exhausted, decimated. He needs to march them 200 miles south again and fight another major battle against a fresh enemy. Dr. John Gillingham, emeritus professor of history at the London School of Economics, writes, "The tragedy of Harold Godwinson is that he won the Battle of Stamford Bridge so completely and so brilliantly that it made no difference. The victory that should have secured his throne instead exhausted the army he needed to defend it." On approximately October 1st, Harold begins marching south. His exhausted soldiers, still carrying their dead friends' weapons, still nursing wounds from Stamford Bridge, march again. They are moving toward a small town in Sussex, near a place called Senlac Hill. History will remember it as the Battle of Hastings, but that is another story. Beyond the grand sweep of armies and the fate of kingdoms, the Battle of Stamford Bridge is also a collection of personal tragedies that deserve to be remembered. We don't know his name. We don't know where he was born, whether he had a wife or children waiting for him in Norway, what dreams he harbored beyond this day. What we know is that he stood alone on a bridge against an army and bought his kinsmen 20 precious minutes to prepare for battle. Whether he knew he was doomed, whether he hoped for rescue, whether in those final moments before the spear thrust up from below ended his life, he regretted his choice. These things are lost to history. But his stand has been remembered for nearly 1,000 years. In a battle of thousands, we remember one nameless warrior who did the impossible. There is something profound in that, in the idea that individual courage, even in a losing cause, even by someone whose name we don't know, can echo through a millennium. Dr. Kelly DeVries, medieval military historian at Loyola University, Maryland, notes, "The story of the bridge defender at Stamford Bridge has all the elements of myth. The lone hero, the impossible odds, the dramatic sacrifice. But unlike most myths, this one appears to be true. Multiple independent sources record it, and the tactical situation explains why the English would have been delayed in crossing. Sometimes, history gives us actual heroes." Tostig's story is perhaps the most tragic because it's so avoidable. He was Harold's brother, born to the same family, raised with the same advantages. But ambition, resentment, and wounded pride led him to betray his brother, his family, and his country. By bringing Harald Hardrada to England, Tostig directly contributes to the crisis that will ultimately destroy the Anglo-Saxon kingdom. If Harold's army had not been decimated at Stamford Bridge, if they had been fresh and at full strength when William landed, the outcome at Hastings might have been different. In Norse saga tradition, Tostig is remembered as a tragic figure, a man destroyed by his inability to forgive perceived slights. In English tradition, he is simply a traitor. Both are probably true. His final moments are not recorded in detail, but we know he died fighting, surrounded by the Norwegian allies he had brought to ravage his homeland. There is no evidence he felt regret. Harold's story is the stuff of legend even before Stamford Bridge. His life was an epic, from teenage refugee to Byzantine emperor's guard, to king of Norway, to would-be conqueror of England. But his ambition exceeded his grasp. The sagas record that before the battle, Harold is said to have composed a poem describing his final moments. Whether the verses are actually his or later additions by saga composers, they capture the mood. "We do not kneel in battle before the storm of weapons, so the wise goddess told me. She said I'd meet my end in England, far from home, cut down by a poisoned weapon, and the prophecy comes true." He was 51 years old, an age when most medieval warriors are long retired or dead. He came to England seeking glory and empire. He found a muddy field and an arrow to the throat. The saga writers, with poetic irony, note that Harold spent his entire life in battle and finally fell when he had almost achieved his greatest ambition. He died within sight of victory. His army was rallying, the battle was not yet decided, killed by a random arrow, a death as arbitrary and meaningless as the deaths of the thousands of common soldiers who fell around him. His body was recovered by the surviving Norse warriors and, according to some sources, eventually returned to Norway for burial. Whether this is true or whether he lies in an unmarked grave in Yorkshire, we cannot know. The immediate aftermath of Stamford Bridge is documented in fragments. Pieces of a larger picture we can only partially reconstruct. The survivors. Of the approximately 15,000 Norse warriors who invaded England, perhaps 3,000 survived to sail home in those 24 ships. Many are wounded. All are traumatized. They carry news back to Norway that their king is dead, their army destroyed, their dreams of empire shattered. The political consequences in Norway are immediate. Harold's son, Magnus, who was left to rule in his father's absence, must consolidate power and deal with rivals who see opportunity in the king's death. The Norwegian kingdom will recover, but its days of foreign conquest are over. The English wounded. Medieval medicine is primitive. Many men who survive the battle will die in the following days and weeks from infected wounds. There are no antibiotics, no understanding of sterilization, no effective painkillers beyond alcohol and opium. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records that Harold gave quarter to Olaf, son of the Norwegian king, and to their bishop and to the Earl of Orkney, and to all those who survived on the ships. This is notable. Harold, despite his desperate military situation and the treachery of the Norse invasion, shows mercy to the survivors. He allows them to sail home rather than executing them or enslaving them. This speaks to Harold's character. Even in extremity, even facing another invasion, even having just lost thousands of men, he chooses mercy over vengeance. It's one of the details that makes him sympathetic to historians and makes his fate at Hastings 3 weeks later all the more tragic. The treasure. The Norse army brought substantial plunder from their raids and substantial supplies for their campaign. This falls into English hands. In purely economic terms, Stamford Bridge is profitable for Harold. He captures ships, weapons, armor, and precious metals. But money cannot replace the men he's lost, or the time he doesn't have. The Fyrds return home. Many of the local militia who joined Harold's army at York now return to their farms and villages. The harvest season is upon them. They've done their duty, fought the invaders, and won. Now they must return to civilian life. Harold cannot force them to stay. The Fyrd system is based on limited service obligations. He needs them for the march south to face William, but he cannot compel them, and many choose to go home. This is one of the subtle ways Stamford Bridge dooms Harold at Hastings. His army is not just exhausted and decimated, it's also smaller, having lost the northern Fyrds who feel they've already done their part. The Battle of Stamford Bridge stands at a hinge point in history, the end of one age and the uncertain beginning of another. Historians traditionally date the Viking Age as beginning in 793 with the raid on Lindisfarne Monastery and ending in 1066 with the Battle of Stamford Bridge. The symmetry is almost too perfect, both events occurring in the north of England, but the symbolic truth is real, even if the neat dating is somewhat arbitrary. Stamford Bridge is the last time a Viking army attempts to conquer a major kingdom through military force. There will be other Viking raids, other conflicts involving Scandinavian powers, but the age of the great invasion fleets, of Norse armies marching into foreign capitals and demanding tribute, is over. Why? Several factors. Christianization. By 1066, Scandinavia is largely Christian. The religious difference that once marked Vikings as pagan raiders has diminished. Scandinavian kingdoms are becoming integrated into European Christian culture. State formation, Norway, Denmark, and Sweden are consolidating into centralized kingdoms, rather than loose confederations of jarls and chieftains. These developing states are more focused on internal development and European diplomacy than raiding. Military evolution. The military advantages Vikings once possessed, superior ships, surprise tactics, mobility, have been countered. European kingdoms have built fortifications, developed navies, and learned to respond quickly to raids. The failure of conquest, the defeats of Hardrada at Stamford Bridge and later Danish attempts to reclaim England show that the era when Viking armies could conquer and hold territory is passing. Dr. Elsa Rosedahl, leading Viking Age historian at Aarhus University, writes, "Stamford Bridge marks a transition. The Viking who falls there is already something of an anachronism, a throwback to the age of great Viking warlords like Eric Bloodaxe and Sweyn Forkbeard. Harald Hardrada is the last of a dying breed, and his death at Stamford Bridge symbolically closes an age." For England, Stamford Bridge is simultaneously the greatest military victory of the late Anglo-Saxon period and the beginning of the end of Anglo-Saxon England. If history had ended on September 26, 1066, Harold Godwinson would be remembered as one of England's greatest warrior kings. The man who marched 200 miles in 4 days, achieved complete tactical surprise, and destroyed the last great Viking invasion. But history did not end. William landed, Harold marched south. And at Hastings on October 14, 1066, Harold Godwinson fell with an arrow to the eye, or so tradition claims. The sources are contradictory. The Norman conquest that followed fundamentally transformed England, its language, its law, its aristocracy, its culture. Within a generation, the Anglo-Saxon nobility would be almost entirely replaced by Norman lords. Old English would begin its evolution into Middle English through massive French influence. The entire structure of English society would be remade. And it's impossible not to wonder, what if William had landed first? What if Harold had faced William with a fresh, full-strength army, then turned north to deal with Hardrada? Dr. Mark Morris, historian and author of The Norman Conquest, argues, "The tragedy is that Harold was almost certainly a better commander than William. His campaign against Hardrada shows strategic brilliance, the forced march, the surprise attack, the decisive victory. If he had faced William under similar conditions, with the advantages of surprise and fresh troops, he might well have won. Stamford Bridge didn't lose England for the Anglo-Saxons, but it made Hastings impossible to win." As we step back from the blood-soaked ground at Stamford Bridge and view the battle from the perspective of nearly 1,000 years, what lessons emerge? Harold's fundamental problem is one that has plagued military commanders throughout history. He cannot be in two places at once. His kingdom faces simultaneous invasions from north and south, separated by 400 miles of medieval English roads. His solution? The forced march north, the quick, decisive victory, the desperate march south, is tactically brilliant but strategically insufficient. He needed more time, more resources, or more luck. He got none of them. The same problem would haunt Napoleon in Russia, the Germans in World War II, and American commanders in Iraq and Afghanistan. When your enemies can choose the time and place of engagement, when you must respond to threats on multiple fronts, when logistics and distance constrain your options, even brilliant tactics may not suffice. Harold wins at Stamford Bridge. He achieves his objectives completely. Hardrada dead, the Norse army destroyed, the northern threat eliminated. But the victory costs him the men, time and resources he needs for his next battle. This is the dark side of victory, that winning can be so costly it leads to ultimate defeat. Military historians call this a Pyrrhic victory, after King Pyrrhus of Epirus, who defeated the Romans but at such cost that he remarked, "Another such victory, and I am undone." Harold could have said the same. He was undone not by defeat, but by the cost of victory. History is not inevitable. Small decisions, random chances, moments of individual courage or cowardice can change everything. If Harald Hardrada had kept his army together and armored, if the Viking giant had not held the bridge, allowing the Norse forces more time to organize, if Harold had arrived a day later, or the wind had favored William a week earlier, if Tostig had accepted his brother's offer of reconciliation, any of these might have changed the outcome. The Norman conquest was not inevitable. Anglo-Saxon England might have survived. The English language might look very different. The course of European history might have diverged in unpredictable ways. The Battle of Stamford Bridge reminds us that history is contingent, that outcomes depend on decisions, that individuals matter, that nothing is written until it happens. Perhaps the deepest lesson of Stamford Bridge is the human cost of political ambition. Harald Hardrada's ambition brought 15,000 men to England. Perhaps 10,000 of them died there. Each was someone's son. Many were fathers and husbands. All had lives and dreams beyond serving as instruments of their king's ambition. Tostig's wounded pride and desire for revenge brought foreign invaders to ravage his own country and forced his brother to fight a battle that would indirectly lead to the destruction of everything both brothers knew. Harold's determination to keep his crown, understandable, perhaps justifiable, but still a form of ambition, cost thousands of English lives at Stamford Bridge and Hastings. None of these men were monsters. Harold was by all accounts a charismatic leader and capable administrator. Tostig was, before his fall, a functional earl. Harold was likely the best ruler available to England at that moment. But their ambitions, their pride, their refusal to compromise, these very human failings, created the conditions for catastrophe. There is a reason the Battle of Stamford Bridge resonates beyond its immediate historical importance. It sits at a liminal moment, a bridge between ages, quite literally. Behind it lies the Viking Age, 3 centuries of Norse raiders and settlers who terrorized, traded with, and transformed Europe. Men who sailed to Constantinople and Newfoundland, who established kingdoms in Dublin and Normandy, who left genetic and linguistic traces from Iceland to Sicily. An age of sagas and longships, of pagan gods giving way to Christ, of warlords becoming kings. Before it lies the Norman Age, the transformation of England through conquest, the blending of Norman, French, and Anglo-Saxon cultures, the beginning of the High Middle Ages with its castles and crusades, its Gothic cathedrals and Arthurian romances. An age where feudalism fully flowers, where kingdoms consolidate, where Europe begins looking outward toward the wider world. Stamford Bridge is the moment of transition when Harald Hardrada, the last great Viking, falls to Harold Godwinson, the last great Anglo-Saxon king, who will in turn fall to William, Duke of Normandy, who will become William the Conqueror and transform everything. On that bridge over the River Derwent, where one warrior held back an army, the old age died and the new age was born in blood and iron. On a September morning in 1066, a Viking warrior chose to stand alone on a wooden bridge against an army. He knew he would die. He stood anyway. For 20 minutes, an eternity in combat, he held the bridge. He bought time. He became legend. His story and the larger story of Stamford Bridge teaches us things that transcend the medieval battlefield. That individual courage matters, even when the cause is lost, even when no one knows your name, even when the larger forces of history are moving in directions beyond your control. That victory and defeat are often arbitrary, determined as much by timing and luck as by skill and courage. Harold was brilliant at Stamford Bridge and dead 3 weeks later. Harald Hardrada was legendary until a random arrow found his throat. The bridge defender was impossibly brave and died anyway. That great events turn on small hinges. If William's winds had failed another week, if Tostig had accepted reconciliation, if Harold had marched a day slower or faster. History is made of such contingencies. That the cost of glory is usually paid by those who never sought it. The nameless soldiers who died by the thousands at Stamford Bridge didn't dream of empire or crowns. They fought because their lords commanded it, because their enemies invaded, because they had no choice. Their names are lost, but their sacrifice is real. That era's end, not with a whimper, but with a battle cry. The Viking Age ended with Harald Hardrada's death scream and the shattering of his army. Anglo-Saxon England ended 3 weeks later at Hastings. Both endings were violent, chaotic, bloody, as most historical transitions are, stripped of the neat periodization of textbooks. The wooden bridge at Stamford Bridge is long gone, rebuilt and rebuilt again over the centuries. The river still flows. The fields where thousands fell are now peaceful farmland, where sheep graze and crops grow, unaware of the bones that might still lie beneath the soil. But the story endures. The Viking giant who held the bridge, Harald Hardrada, who travelled from Norway to Jerusalem and found his death in Yorkshire, Tostig, whose pride destroyed him, Harold Godwinson, who won brilliantly and lost tragically, and the thousands whose names we don't know but whose blood soaked into English earth on that September day. History is not the grand sweep of dates and dynasties. It is the sum of individual choices, to stand or run, to fight or surrender, to hold the bridge or let it fall. On September 25th, 1066, thousands of men made those choices. The world we live in today is, in small ways and large, shaped by what they decided in those desperate hours. That is why we remember. That is why we tell the story. That is why, nearly 1,000 years later, the Battle of Stamford Bridge still matters. Because somewhere, on some bridge we cannot yet see, we will all have to choose whether to stand or step aside. And the choices of those who came before us, their courage and their failings, their victories and their defeats, light our way forward into an uncertain future. The bridge stands as metaphor and memory, the narrow place where we make our stand, where history is written in blood and courage, where one person can, for a brief and shining moment, hold back the tide. Sometimes they hold it long enough, sometimes they fail, but they stand, and in the standing they become eternal. The Battle of Stamford Bridge occurred on September 25th, 1066. 20 days later, on October 14, 1066, Harold Godwinson fell at the Battle of Hastings, and England passed into Norman hands. The Viking Age was over. The Anglo-Saxon Age was over. The medieval world we think we know was beginning, and it all turned on a bridge, a forced march and the courage of men whose names we barely remember, but whose choices still echo through the ages. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, honor it by sharing it. History lives only as long as we remember.